Hi, everyone. I am Hanh. I am IF's Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and want to thank you for joining our breakout session this afternoon about our reparations and economic justice pillar. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Awesome, thank you. All right, so I'm curious. You guys have been doing a lot of listening. Some of you have been interacting in the chat, which we appreciate. But when you hear reparations and economic justice, what feelings or emotions come up for you? Why don't you put that into the chat? Let's see what you think. It's time. I'm going to read some of these. It's time, a sense of urgency and excitement. Overdue but complicated. What they stole, we getting back. Bold and overdue. It feels like it will happen. How can I get involved? I love this. Transfer of power. All right. I encourage you to keep participating in the chat as we go through this. I will talk a little bit about repairing trauma. Thank you, Ronnie. I will talk a little bit about why this pillar is a part of IF's work, right? And then we'll take part in a conversation with some of the folks working on various reparations and economic justice projects with us. So our reparations and economic justice pillar is about supporting economic justice movements, including the movement to pay reparations to Black people who are owed a debt as a result of the historic and contemporary racial harms, right? So we have guiding questions for each of our pillars. So the guiding question for this pillar is, what if Black people were paid the debt they are owed? America has benefited from uncompensated Black labor and genius, while popular narratives suggest that Black people lack wealth because of individual choices. We know the truth is that the power that the over 400 years of collective harm by federal, state, and local governments, private industry, and individuals has created the wealth gap. And Black wealth inequality began with the brutality of enslavement and has continued through legal segregation and has continued through underpaid and unpaid labor, land theft, and ongoing discrimination and stigmatization. So William Darity and Kirsten Mullen, in their book From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, they define reparations as a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure for a grievous injustice. And this is the framework that we believe in IF, right? 3 parts. You need the acknowledgement, the redress, and the closure, right? And that's the type of reparations for which we're advocating. And IF has never taken a public position on reparations until now. And as we transition from a focus on racial equity to one on racial justice, the distinction that we're making between the two is that racial justice requires the acknowledgement and repair of the harm caused by centuries of discriminatory anti-Black policies, practices, and programs. And in addition to our work on reparations, we support other economic justice initiatives, especially those that prioritize direct cash payment to people who are systematically marginalized. So in the time that we have together, which looks like it is 20 minutes, I'm gonna talk even more quickly. Venorica Tucker, or V, a hospitality worker and organizer with Restaurant Opportunity Center DC, or ROC-DC, who was displaced from her job due to COVID and inspired our Let's Go DMV Guaranteed Income pilot for hospitality workers, is gonna chat with me for a bit. And then I'll chat with Ryan Schlegel, who is the Director of Research at the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, or NCRP, which is our philanthropic partner on our reparations project for foundations. So we'll chat a little bit with V and Ryan, and then I'll open up the floor for you to share your reflections and questions. All right. So let's start with our Guaranteed Income Pilot project. V, are you there?
I am.
Hi, V. So at the top of the pandemic, V, you approached IF about the possibility of investing funds that you and your coworkers were raising to support hospitality workers who lost jobs because of COVID. And the idea was to create residual income from that investment that would support cash transfer to these workers, right? Since then, it has partnered with you, your colleague, Glenda Rodriguez, ROC-DC, Amalgamated Bank, and Foundation the Greater Washington Community Foundation, and the Washington Regional Association of Grantmakers to develop this really exciting 5-year guaranteed income pilot for hospitality workers who lost jobs due to COVID. So we call it Let's Go, or Let's Guarantee Opportunity DMV. And what is unique about Let's Go DMV, we think, is that it centers workers and will be funded by both philanthropic grants and program-related investments. And the pilot includes a strong narrative component to help make the case for government-supported guaranteed income programs, which we will do in collaboration with the DC UBI Coalition and other pilots and coalitions throughout the region. So I just want to underline, there's been plenty of research done to show that cash transfer, guaranteed income, UBI programs work, but there's a disconnect between the public and political will to implement these programs. So this is a pilot that's going to make the case for that, right? So V, as if and our partners go out and tell folks about Let's Go DMV, many want to know how we will select the pilot participants. And we really want to flip that narrative, right? Flip the script on this, because it's not about us selecting people to participate in our pilot. It's actually you, the workers. You all chose each other, and then you came to us. So could you talk to us about the workers you've been organizing with through ROC-DC, who you are, what are some of the challenges and opportunities you've been navigating since COVID?
Well, Glenda Rodriguez and myself started to talk about how we could help our coworkers and others that we knew that were in the industry. We started to get people together, and we talked about how we could set things up so that we would be surviving and not just getting by with unemployment, because we knew that that would end eventually. We did not know what we were going to do. We've worked all our lives with dignity and integrity to develop professional skills in the food service industry. And so what you're witnessing now is a resourcefulness and sufficiency with the experience gained from working with every discipline and business and clientele that you can think of. We have provided them with the top level experience of our respective roles in the food and service industry. And we have our own personal honor and dignity at risk of being taken away from us. And we've gained this over the years, and we've earned, I'm sorry, earned and all that we have mastered over the years. What you're currently witnessing is the explanation of talent and knowledge and insight and awareness that says, we've got the goods. We know we've got the wherewithal. All that we're determined, and we're all determined to redefine ourselves. And with the talent and intelligence, experience, and understanding of what we have accomplished over the years, we cannot be undervalued. We say that because we see that a lot of people look at food service industry people and they say, oh, anybody can do that. What are you going to, you're just doing this until you get a real job. So if you're now without a job because of the pandemic and you can't survive, people are looking at us like, well, now go get a real job, get new training, do whatever you need to do. But I think what they're missing is that many of us are older. Many of us have, maybe there are language issues, maybe there are other kinds of skills and knowledge that we may not have, but we've got this knowledge. We know how to do this. We know how to provide this service, and we know how to do it well. In a lot of other countries, people are respected that work in this industry. Oftentimes you find no respect coming from the people in the States here. They look at you and as if, you're just, anybody could do your job. It's no big deal. Not so. So we are now simply trying to utilize all of the skills and talents we have, which is, we talked about developing cookbooks, and we've actually developed one. And we've talked about food shows. We've talked about food trucks. We've looked at other things that we could do, but all of those things require money. And so we're looking for ways to have money to live, but we're also looking for ways to develop programs that will keep us surviving long after this pandemic and whatever else may follow it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, V. And that narrative change piece about hospitality workers and who's deserving of what is part of what your voice and ROC-DC and what we're trying to do through this pilot has so much potential to do. So thank you. What are some other things that you hope come out of this pilot? There's so many different components to it, but what are some other outcomes you're hoping for?
What I'm hoping is that the people that are generous enough to contribute to this this program, that they will do so, and that this will be successful, and we'll see that there'll be many to follow, because it's not just the hospitality workers who are suffering; it's many people who have suffered from again, and it looks like it's going to be a long and hard time coming back. So we're hoping that folks will see that the program that we're doing with IF and ROC and the other organizations that are involved, that they'll see the success in those programs, and that others will want to pick up the mantle and go forward and do more.
Yeah. Thank you so much, V, for your leadership, not just in this project, but for the many years of organizing that you've been doing for workers' rights in our community. And it's actually a great segue for those of you who are wondering how you can engage in our Let's Go DMV Guaranteed Income Pilot. We're asking everyone to join us in learning about and advocating for government-supported guaranteed income. There are a lot of pilots happening across the region right now. Support those, and also support for the larger systems change that's needed, right? We're also actively seeking funders, as we mentioned, to commit additional grants to support the first year of cash payments to the workers, thanks to Open Horizon, Horning Family Foundation, a couple of others who've committed already for that first year. We're super excited to bring you into the mix. And then in early 2022, we'll offer an impact investment opportunity, essentially asking investors to make an interest-free loan by forfeiting the interest earned on that investment that will benefit the region, whether it's affordable housing or Black enterprise development, so that it can go to pay for GI payments for the next 2 to 5 years of the pilot. So we're also trying to figure out a way to build in financial sustainability to support this pilot through this double bottom line impact investment model. So learn more by reaching out to me or go to our website. Now I want to turn to Ryan and our foundation Reparations project. Thanks again, B. So IF is partnering with the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, NCRP, on a foundation reparations project that we hope will illuminate the ways in which Black people's labor and genius have been exploited and stolen to build philanthropic wealth in the DC region. That's right, including, right, even IF, our foundation. We're excited to be in talks with the new Racial Justice Institute at Georgetown University about being our academic research partner on this project as well. And we hope that the project makes a compelling case for reparative philanthropy from DC area foundations to the DC area's Black communities by outlining the details and quantifying harm on a foundation by foundation basis, right? So essentially, if we're going to call for government reparations, we also want to call and implement foundation reparations. So Ryan, what can you just, for folks who don't know, what is NCRP and why do you want to do this foundation reparations work?
Yeah, greetings everyone. Thank you, Hanh, and thanks to all of you for being here. My name is Ryan Schlegel. I am the Director of Research at NCRP, as Hanh has just said. And NCRP is about a 50-year-old research and advocacy organization based here in DC. We were founded by a coalition of grassroots organizations who really wanted to counterbalance some of the power that philanthropy had by organizing themselves and by offering a kind of critical perspective on how foundations could better meet community needs. So that's been kind of baked into our DNA since our inception, again, 50 years ago. And since then, we've really positioned ourselves as the only independent watchdog organization within the philanthropic sector, calling on foundations to be accountable to communities. So NCRP takes the perspective on institutional philanthropy that all of the dollars locked up in charitable endowments are partially public because they've been subsidized by tax dollars. And for that reason, it is our business, the public's business, how those dollars are allocated. And so from there, we build with our grassroots nonprofit member organizations, many of whom are organizations working at the front lines of movements like the pro-immigrant movement and the movement for Black liberation. We work with them and bring to bear strategic research, strategic communications, and community organizing to try to really, like I said, shift the balance of power in philanthropy away from the people who currently control most of the resources and toward community, toward the grassroots. So that being said, that's sort of what NCRP does, and the reason why we're really excited to work with IF and potentially Georgetown around this philanthropic reparations work is because we really see this as the as a new kind of way to hold foundations accountable, to sort of lean into that work that NCRP has been doing for 50 years. This work is really about sort of the acknowledgement phase of the acknowledgement, redress, and closure arc that Hanh pointed out. And so, you know, given NCRP's track record again and our sort of position in the sector as that kind of independent watchdog and critical friend, it felt like a good role for us to take on. But more than that, I think that, you know, what NCRP recognizes, given our many ties to movement on our board and elsewhere, and given our kind of 50 years of perspective as an organization, is that we're in a moment now, I think, that's been created by especially Black-led movement, where conversations within philanthropy, I think, are ready to move from not just like responsiveness and responding to community, but actually repairing the harm that was done in sort of the money's previous life, right before it was an endowment, when it was actually made. And so yeah, we're really excited. And I think one of the other things I wanted to point out here is that we think that this project is has the potential to be a pilot and to be replicated in other parts of the country. So we're really excited to be sort of laser focused on our kind of our home. Most of us live here in DC and have put down roots here or have grown up here in the area. We're excited to sort of focus in on the DC area first, but we also think that as a national organization, from our perspective, this there's an opportunity here to really, I think, develop a methodology for how to evaluate these kind of claims that could certainly be replicated in other parts of the country with other communities of foundations.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ryan. We talked a little bit yesterday, and I know that there are kind of like two questions that are a lot of questions for us as we go into the planning phase and scoping phase of this work. But there are two that are particularly front of mind for you right now. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I think the two that are front of mind for me are one, how does, and I apologize, my cat is gonna try to join us here.
You're welcome.
Are one, how to engage impacted people effectively and responsibly in this process. And I think that there's a lot in there, right? Like, and I'm being deliberately sort of broad in my language because we are being deliberately broad as far as the time span and sort of in measuring harm to Black communities. And so I think it's entirely possible that we will be connected in the course of this work with people who are impacted by, for example, things like the clearance of Southwest DC and other very recent anti-Black kind of policies that the city has affected. And then I think it's also possible that we'll need to work with an academic partner to engage the historical record in a way that really gets around some of like the white historiography and like anti-Black historiography, and again, engages impacted people in a way that is really responsible and will be effective for this work. So that's like one thing that's front of mind for me that we need to, I know, like devote a lot of attention to as we're thinking about this. And then the other is like, how do we scope, right? So I think that determining for this phase of the work, which foundations are going to be in scope. We can't do every foundation that's working here in the DMV, and I think deciding whether, for example, we want to start from moments where harm can be sort of quickly and readily measured. I mentioned the clearance of Southwest DC a moment ago. So that's one example where we can kind of document the harm that was done and then connect that to modern philanthropic fortunes by, for example, tracing some of the real estate money that was made in those transactions to modern day endowments. That's one way. But we could also start from modern day endowments and work our way back to identify some places where there's harm to Black people that needs to be accounted for. I mean, we are, again, and this is why we're excited to bring the academic partner on board to sort of help us think about how to adjudicate all of these different kinds of reparations claims. But we are thinking about how, for example, the modern financialized capitalism harms Black people, just like we're thinking about how enslavement harmed Black people. So we're sort of, thinking about sort of how to scope it, I think, and how to focus in on this pilot on some foundations, on a smaller sort of group of foundations, I think is another thing that's front of mind for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. So for those of you who are wondering how to engage in our Foundation Reparations project, you can see we're still in the early scoping phase, right? So as we map out who our stakeholders are and how best to engage them, we will have a better sense of engagement opportunities. So for now, just reach out to Ryan or to me about learning more about the project, about being studied, your foundation being studied, contributing funding support is always welcome, and other ways that you might be able to be engaged. So it looks like we have a little over 2 minutes left. So there is a little bit of time if folks want to just unmute or put in the chat what questions you have. Thanks for sharing your email in the chat. Appreciate all the great comments in the chat as well. Any questions or any reflections folks have as you're listening to us, just like share these a little bit, dip our toe into sharing a little bit about these two projects under our reparations and economic justice pillar.
This is David Bowers from Enterprise. Thanks so much for you all having this conversation. It's good to see folks. A question for you and Ryan, and as you all, I'm curious, the feedback you've gotten from your peers in philanthropy as you've talked about this, and whether or not it's been kind of positive, negative, neutral, or, I'd really be interested in what kind of feedback you're getting from your peers.
That is such a good question. And I'll be honest, David, and it's good to see you. When I joined IF and I learned this was one of the projects, I was like, oh my goodness, this could really scary. We might potentially piss off a lot of foundations, right? But one of the things we really need to do is so many foundations are, talking that racial equity, racial justice talk, and you can't talk racial justice without talking reparations. You can't talk reparations without looking at how your own wealth has been built and continues to be accumulated. Sounds great, right? Theoretically and on principle, but it is scary, right? And so we've talked to several foundation peers, and I think some are interested, like, oh, we'd like to hear how it goes and, all of that. And I think something that we want to make clear in a really non-threatening way is that IF is going to have our endowment studied, and we are going to scope and choose other foundations that we think are primed to be studied. And we would love for those foundations to join us and partner with us in that. But even if a foundation opts out, it doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to study them, right? Because we think that this really needs to be, that the truth needs to be uncovered. Leonard, hi, I see your hand up.
Hi, yes. So, Hanh, what's the difference between what, we are going to try to do as far as reparations are? I mean, how different is it from the Native Americans who received their reparations and the, Japanese Americans? I mean, the foundation is already there. They did it with those two groups. I don't understand why it should be so difficult with African Americans.
So much of this is about the public and political will, Leonard, and that's why another pillar for us is culture and narrative change, right?
So what they're saying is the Native Americans and Japanese Americans are worth more than African Americans. That's basically what you're telling me that they're saying.
That, like there's a lot of work we have to do to change that narrative.
But they didn't have to do a lot of work with the Native Americans and the Japanese Americans.
Yeah, and that's the deep history of anti-Black racism in our country. Yeah, for sure. So there's so much here to talk about, and I think that we are going to get bumped back into the main room